My fiancé let his friends vote on dumping me. I caught him cheating and ended him in a family showdown. My fiancé Daniel told me I was controlling. Why? Because I didn't want his ex-girlfriend Isabelle at our wedding. So what did he do? He let his friends vote on whether he should dump me, all while secretly having an emotional affair with Isabelle and calling me crazy.
Daniel returned home from his celebratory weekend in Riverton last Friday night, heavily inebriated. He immediately launched into a tirade about how his group of male acquaintances thought I was irrational and possessive. I challenged him, "What on earth are you talking about?" He started laughing, this tall, fair-haired man I was supposed to marry in 5 weeks, and revealed that his friends had actually held a vote on whether he should end our engagement before the ceremony. A vote? I was incredulous. My worth was treated like some kind of public opinion poll in their trivial online chat. I discovered the entire discussion had been triggered because Daniel's close friend, Chris, questioned why Isabelle wasn't on the wedding guest list. Isabelle was Daniel's former partner from Wessex University, whom he dated for over 2 years. She still posts admiring heart and wink emojis on nearly every one of his social media updates. Yes, that Isabelle, the same one who continues to attend all their collective gatherings 2 years post-breakup and acts as if she's a permanent fixture in their social ecosystem. Daniel initially tried to defend me, stating it was standard practice that people planning a wedding generally don't invite their partner's exes. But then Chris aggressively argued that Isabelle was essentially a member of their extended family, and that I was being utterly unreasonable. Rather than immediately shutting down this disrespectful line of conversation, Daniel admitted he simply sat there while they began dissecting my personal character flaws as though I were a problem that required group intervention. By the time they had visited 3 different craft ale establishments, they were openly debating whether Daniel should call off the wedding because I was overly suspicious and controlling. Chris even pulled up an article on his mobile device about warning signs in romantic relationships and began reading passages aloud, asserting that I supposedly met half the stated conditions. The other acquaintances joined in with their so-called expert relationship commentary, claiming their female partners would never behave this way and that I needed to adopt a more relaxed demeanor. And my fiancé, the man I was scheduled to marry, simply permitted them to speak about me in such terms. He offered no defense, refused to tell them to cease, and didn't even leave the premises. He remained, consuming beer and nodding while his friends dissected our shared life as if it were a mandatory social club meeting. The final vote was reportedly quite close. 4 men suggested he end the engagement. 3 advised he continue with the wedding, but only if I first apologized to Isabelle. And only 2 agreed that I had a valid reason for excluding the ex from the guest list. Only 2 out of 9 individuals thought I was being sensible for not wanting his ex at our upcoming ceremony. When Daniel recounted all of this, he was laughing, treating it as a funny anecdote, as if the fact that his closest male friends believed he should abandon me was merely harmless locker room talk. He repeatedly insisted that I should view it as a positive sign that they cared enough about him to offer their unfiltered opinions, and suggested I ought to consider their perspective as they knew him better than anyone. I directly asked him what had he said to his friends while they were casting their votes. He immediately grew defensive, claiming he attempted to explain my side, but that I needed to grasp how the situation appeared to outsiders. How did it look? I asked. Did I have some kind of duty to roll out the metaphorical red carpet for my former partner at my own wedding? The most upsetting part was this was not the first time Isabelle had caused strain in our relationship. She constantly messaged him with trivialities. "Oh, I saw this digital image that reminded me of you. Oh, do you remember that time we dined at that bistro? Oh, my car's having issues. Do you know a reliable mechanic?" And every time I raised my concerns, Daniel acted as though I were being paranoid and jealous.
He maintained that Isabelle was simply being friendly and that I needed to trust him. But here was the essential point. I did trust Daniel. I did not trust Isabelle. And I absolutely did not trust Isabelle's constant need to find reasons to remain linked to Daniel. When our engagement was announced, Isabelle was one of the first people to comment on the social media post, writing about how thrilled she was for us and couldn't wait to attend the celebration. The sheer audacity was unbelievable. So now I was expected to tolerate the fact that his entire social circle considered me a controlling harpy who didn't deserve him, and that my fiancé had sat passively while they voted on our union as if it were a democratic exercise. I spent all of the next day trying to process this.
I've been vacillating between deep hurt and utter rage. A small part of me wants to terminate the engagement myself, just to witness the expressions on their faces when their cherished Isabelle still doesn't receive an invitation. But the major concern is wondering what else Daniel permitted his friends to say about me when I wasn't present. We're scheduled to meet with our event coordinator the next day to finalize the guest seating arrangements. I have no idea how I'm supposed to go there and behave as though everything is perfectly normal, knowing his friends think he should leave me. The wedding is just 5 weeks away, and we've already paid for everything. The venue at the Grand Ballroom, the catering company, my ivory gown, all of it. I haven't told anyone about this ordeal yet because, truthfully, I'm mortified. How do you explain to your family and acquaintances that your fiancé's bachelor party devolved into a public opinion poll on whether you are a suitable marriage partner? My sister, Zoe, a 28-year-old marketing executive, is already suspicious, as she thinks Daniel is excessively attached to his friend group anyway, and if I told her this, she would be livid. The truth was, I know I wasn't being irrational about the Isabelle situation. Every single one of my married friends has assured me that not inviting exes was completely standard and expected behavior. My cousin had not invited her husband's ex. My colleague had not invited her husband's ex. Even my mother had not invited any of my father's exes to their ceremony. It wasn't about insecurity. It was just fundamental common sense and respect for boundaries. But Daniel keeps making me feel as if I am the problem, as if I'm expected to be this effortlessly cool woman who is fine with his ex being at the wedding, messaging him constantly, and inserting herself into every facet of our relationship. And now his friends are backing him up, making me feel like there was something inherently wrong with me for having normal expectations. I keep dwelling on what else they must have said about me that Daniel has not disclosed. If he was willing to tell me about the vote, what other details had they shared that he was withholding? Did they comment on my appearance? On how I behaved around them? Did they bring up other things I had done that they perceived as warning signs? The whole incident has me doubting every aspect of our relationship. If Daniel genuinely thought I was being unreasonable, why didn't he simply discuss it with me privately instead of allowing his friends to debate it at his party? And if he truly believed his friends were right, why was he still proceeding with the wedding? I desperately need guidance because I have no idea how to proceed. Should I confront his friends directly? Should I demand that Daniel unequivocally defend me to them? Should I just pretend this had never occurred and hope it wouldn't be mentioned again? Or should I seriously consider whether I wanted to marry a man who allowed his friends to vote on my worthiness? The wedding is so near and everything is arranged, but I am beginning to wonder if I am making a catastrophic mistake. How am I expected to walk down the aisle knowing that a significant portion of his wedding party thought he should break up with me instead? First, thank you to everyone who confirmed I wasn't being irrational about the Isabelle situation. Reading all the responses made me realize how fundamentally flawed this entire situation was. The comment that his friends had basically held a court hearing about my value really resonated. That was precisely what it had been. So we had our meeting with the event coordinator, Patrice, at a small office suite in the business park near our flat. Daniel was acting as if everything was completely normal, discussing table decor and whether we preferred the salmon or the beef option. I was sitting there attempting to concentrate, but all I could think about was his wedding party's opinion. Finally, I couldn't stand it any longer and informed Patrice that we needed a few minutes alone. The moment Patrice left, I started furiously confronting him about my inability to stop thinking about what he had disclosed. Daniel immediately started claiming I was overblowing the situation, that men engage in vulgar talk when they're drinking, and I shouldn't take it so seriously. But here's where things got truly awful.
When I pressed him for more specifics about what exactly they had said about me, he accidentally revealed that Chris had been talking about this for many months. Apparently, every time they socialized with the group, Chris would make side comments to the other men about how I was too rigid or how Daniel was more fun before he got involved with me. And Daniel had simply been sitting there listening to this insulting behavior for months without ever telling me or stopping it. I demanded to know why he hadn't told me that his best friend had been slandering me behind my back. And Daniel became angry, accusing me of making him feel as though he had to choose between his friends and his fiancé. He began a long rant about how Chris had been his friend since university, and he couldn't just cut him off because Chris wasn't completely enamored with me. The discussion became very intense, and Daniel finally admitted that perhaps some of what Chris said wasn't entirely inaccurate. He said he had noticed that I did appear anxious when Isabelle's name came up, and that maybe I could try to be more accepting of his friendship with Isabelle. He actually had the audacity to suggest that I should reach out to Isabelle myself and attempt to cultivate a friendly relationship with her so that his friends would see I wasn't the controlling person they assumed me to be. I was utterly shocked by what I was hearing. My own fiancé was suggesting that perhaps his friends had a valid point about me being jealous and controlling. After 3 years together, after proposing to me, after organizing this entire wedding, he was suddenly entertaining the possibility that their concerns were legitimate. I told him that if he believed his friends were right about me, then perhaps we shouldn't proceed with the marriage at all. And instead of immediately saying, "No, absolutely not, I love you," he became silent for an extremely long time, as if he were genuinely contemplating the suggestion. Then he said that he loved me, but he was worried about his friends' feelings regarding our relationship, because those were the people who would be permanent fixtures in our lives. Our event coordinator knocked on the door, asking if everything was all right, as we had been in there for around 30 minutes. Daniel simply smiled and said we were fine and asked if we could postpone. During the entire drive home, we did not exchange a single word, and I could tell he was thinking about everything his friends had said. That evening when we got back, Daniel tried to mitigate the situation by saying he hadn't intended to make me feel bad. But then he brought up the Isabelle issue again. He said that maybe if I just gave Isabelle a chance and tried to be friendly with her, it would demonstrate to his friends that I wasn't threatened by her and that I trusted him. He kept asserting that Isabelle was genuinely kind once you got to know her and wasn't trying to cause any trouble between us. But then, and this was the detail that truly devastated me, he admitted that Isabelle had been asking him about our wedding preparations. Not just casual inquiries, but detailed questions like the location of the reception and the date, and whether she might secure an invitation after all. Daniel had told her that I was managing the guest list and that it probably wasn't going to work out, but he said it in an apologetic tone, as if he regretted she couldn't attend. I asked him why Isabelle would assume she might be invited in the first place, and Daniel grew extremely uneasy and admitted that perhaps he hadn't been sufficiently clear with Isabelle about boundaries. Apparently, he had been discussing our wedding planning and our relationship conflicts with Isabelle, including the fact that I didn't want her there. So Isabelle knew that I was the reason for the exclusion, and she had been attempting to circumvent me by speaking to Daniel directly about the issue. This entire time, I had thought Isabelle was just being inappropriate by remaining in contact with my fiancé.
But it turned out Daniel had been sharing personal information about our relationship and our wedding plans with her. He had been framing me as the villain who wouldn't allow Isabelle to attend the wedding, instead of simply telling Isabelle that it wasn't appropriate for an ex to be there. When I confronted him about this, Daniel claimed he was just trying to be honest with Isabelle because she had been part of his social group for so long. He said it would feel strange to suddenly start being secretive about his life when she asked him questions. But I pointed out that there was a massive difference between being secretive and sharing private details about our relationship and our wedding plans with his former partner.
The argument continued the next day when Daniel proposed that we all meet up at the Rail Stop Sports Bar near his office. Him, me, Isabelle, and maybe a couple of the other friends, so that I could see for myself that Isabelle wasn't attempting to cause trouble. He thought if I simply spend some time with her, I'd realize Isabelle was harmless, and his friends would see that I wasn't actually jealous or controlling. I told him absolutely not, that I wasn't going to place myself in some bizarre scenario where I had to prove to his ex-girlfriend and his friends that I was cool enough to deserve him. The fact that he even suggested it demonstrated how completely flawed his understanding was about the entire situation. But Daniel kept pushing, arguing that if I truly trusted him, then I should be willing to spend time with Isabelle. He said my refusal to even meet with Isabelle was only reinforcing his friend's opinion that I was insecure and controlling. He made it sound as though the mature, confident response would be to sit down with his ex and sort things out like grown-ups. I tried to explain to him that this was not about trust or insecurity. It was about establishing appropriate boundaries within our relationship. But he continually reverted to what his friends thought and how the situation looked to other people. He said that everyone in their group was confused about why I wouldn't even try to get along with Isabelle, and that it was creating a tense atmosphere for everyone involved. The whole conversation made me realize that Daniel cared more about his friends' opinions than about my feelings. He was more concerned about appearing to be the man whose fiancé wouldn't allow him to be friends with his ex than he was about the fact that his friends thought he should leave me. Thursday afternoon, I was at a large general merchandise store picking up items for my work presentation when I ran into Patrice, one of Daniel's colleagues from his firm. We had met a few times at company social events, and Patrice had always been friendly. She was in the personal care aisle getting medication, and we ended up chatting while we waited in the queue. Patrice mentioned she had heard about our upcoming wedding and how exciting it must be. But then she adopted a strange expression and asked if everything was all right. When I asked what she meant, Patrice said Daniel had seemed very agitated recently and had been discussing relationship matters with some of the men at work. My heart sank, realizing Daniel had been talking about our issues at work too, not just with his college friends. Patrice said she didn't want to get involved, but she had overheard Daniel seeking advice on how to manage a situation with someone who was being irrational about boundaries. I couldn't believe he was painting me as the problem to his coworkers as well. Patrice could tell I was distressed and apologized for mentioning anything. But then she added that another colleague, Kyle, had told Daniel that some women just can't tolerate their partner having female friends, and that perhaps Daniel needed to be more firm about setting expectations. So now I was finding out that not only had his old friends been debating whether he should dump me, but his colleagues thought I was some sort of jealous girlfriend who couldn't handle him having female friends. Daniel had been constructing this image of me as an insecure, controlling person to everyone in his life, and I was completely unaware. When I got home and confronted Daniel about discussing our relationship with his coworkers, he tried to minimize it by claiming he was just relieving stress about the wedding and asking for generalized advice. But I pointed out that asking whether it's normal for fiancés to be jealous is not the same as venting about wedding planning. He was specifically portraying me as the core issue and soliciting external validation that I was being unreasonable. Daniel countered that I talked to my friends about our relationship too, so why couldn't he talk to his friends about it? but I explained that there's a clear distinction between discussing problems with close friends and presenting a biased version of events to colleagues and casual acquaintances.
When I talked to Zoe or my close friends about relationship matters, I was seeking genuine advice and perspective. Daniel was seeking people to agree with him that I was being difficult. The argument intensified when Daniel accused me of being paranoid and suggested that perhaps his friends and coworkers were observing something that I couldn't see about my own behavior. He said that when multiple people are conveying the same message, maybe I should consider that they might have a valid argument instead of assuming everyone else is mistaken. I couldn't believe he was actually suggesting I should take relationship advice from Kyle and Chris, who still acted like a student in a fraternity. But Daniel kept insisting that an outside perspective is valuable and that I was too emotionally close to the situation to view it objectively. He said that maybe I should consider that my boundaries weren't as reasonable as I believed them to be. Friday morning, I had to leave early for a work presentation. As I was grabbing my keys from the kitchen counter, I noticed Daniel's phone was charging and its screen was illuminated with a text notification. I wasn't intentionally spying, but the preview showed Isabel's name and something related to wedding planning. Without even consciously thinking about it, I picked up his phone to read the message. The text inquired whether Daniel had spoken to me about reconsidering the guest list and if there was any remote possibility I might change my mind about including her. But when I scrolled up to see the rest of their conversation, I found weeks of messages between them that I had been completely unaware of. Isabelle had been texting Daniel regularly about all sorts of things: work troubles, family issues, random reflections on their university days. But intermingled with all the casual chat were messages about our relationship and our wedding. Isabelle continually asked about the progress of the wedding planning and whether I was causing any difficulties. Daniel would respond by complaining about how stressed I was making him with all my strong opinions and expectations. In one message exchange from a few weeks prior, Isabelle was expressing sympathy to Daniel about how challenging it must be to organize a wedding with someone who had such definite opinions about everything. Daniel responded by saying that sometimes he wished he and Isabelle would have had an easier relationship because she was always so easygoing about things. Isabelle replied with a series of laughing emojis and said that some people are just naturally more demanding than others. They were literally discussing me as though I were some kind of difficult obligation that Daniel had to manage. And Isabelle was encouraging the behavior, positioning herself as the relaxed, uncomplicated girl who would never create problems like I did. But the worst part was discovering messages where Daniel was telling Isabelle specific details about our arguments. He told her about the time I was annoyed because Isabelle was liking all his social media posts, and Isabelle responded by saying she hadn't even noticed she was doing that and that she'd be more careful. Daniel told her she didn't need to change anything, that I was just being overly sensitive. There were messages about our disagreements over the guest list, our conflicts regarding the wedding budget. Daniel was sharing private details about our relationship with his former partner, and she was responding with advice and commentary as if she were a relationship guru. When Daniel got home from work Friday night, I didn't even give him a chance to formulate an excuse. I just started reading the messages aloud and watched his expression change as he realized the depth of his indiscretion. He attempted to explain by saying that he and Isabelle had always been able to discuss anything and that he valued her perspective because she knew him so well. He claimed he wasn't attempting to betray my trust. He was simply processing his emotions with someone who understood him. But I pointed out that processing your feelings about your current relationship with your ex-girlfriend is not normal or appropriate when you're engaged to someone else. Daniel became defensive and said that I was exaggerating the situation, that Isabelle was just being a supportive friend and assisting him in navigating a difficult period. But I read him the message where Isabelle said some people are naturally more demanding and asked him how that was being supportive of our relationship. He was unable to answer. So instead, he became angry at me for looking through his phone and infringing on his privacy. He said that if I trusted him, I wouldn't feel the need to check his messages.
and that my snooping was only confirming his friend's belief that I was controlling and insecure. I told him that discovering my fiancé had been sharing private details about our relationship with his ex-girlfriend was not about trust or insecurity. It was about fundamental respect and appropriate boundaries. But Daniel kept trying to reverse the blame, stating that healthy relationships necessitate trust and that I was creating problems where none existed. My sister Zoe called me Thursday night just to check on the wedding details, and I ended up telling her everything. Zoe was absolutely incensed and said she had been wary of Daniel's friend group from the start because they all still behaved like university students. She pointed out that it was abnormal for a group of men in their late 20s to be so heavily invested in each other's relationships, and that healthy friend groups do not hold votes on whether someone should break up with their partner. Zoe also said something that deeply affected me. She asked why Daniel needed his friend's endorsement to marry me if he genuinely loved me and wanted to spend his life with me. Why did Chris's or anyone else's opinion matter? The fact that he was so preoccupied with their view suggested that perhaps he wasn't as certain about our relationship as he claimed. But when I told her about the messages with Isabelle, Zoe was completely furious. She said that Daniel was essentially engaged in an emotional infidelity and using Isabelle as a sounding board for all his relationship conflicts instead of resolving them with me. She pointed out that seeking advice from your ex about your current relationship is the literal definition of inappropriate, and that Isabelle was obviously encouraging the drama because she enjoyed being positioned as the understanding one. Zoe said I needed to seriously contemplate whether I wanted to marry a man who discussed our private life with his ex-girlfriend and permitted his friends to vote on my worthiness. She said that this type of behavior does not improve after marriage. It gets worse, because then he would feel like he had even more control over the relationship. Saturday morning, Daniel attempted to smooth things over by suggesting we take a day trip to the large discount shopping center about an hour away to look for some last-minute wedding items. I believed he was hoping spending time together outside of our apartment would help us return to normalcy. But I was still raging about everything I had uncovered. While we were walking through the center, Daniel kept trying to bring up wedding details as if nothing had happened. He wanted to talk about upgrading the flowers and whether we had enough RSVPs returned yet. But I kept thinking about how he'd been complaining to Isabelle about my opinions and expectations, and how his friends thought he should dump me. When we stopped at the restaurant section for lunch, Daniel finally addressed the main issue by suggesting that perhaps we should speak to his friends together so I could see for myself that they didn't actually dislike me. He proposed hosting everyone for dinner so I could demonstrate to them that I wasn't the controlling person they assumed I to be. I told him that I was not interested in auditioning for his friends' approval, and that the fact that he thought I should have to prove myself to them showed how utterly misguided his priorities were. But Daniel kept insisting that it would help clear the atmosphere, and that once they got to know me better, they would realize their concerns were baseless. The conversation became heated, right there in the middle of the restaurant area, with Daniel saying I was being obstinate and me pointing out that I shouldn't have to campaign for my own fiancé's friends to deem me worthy of him. A couple of young people at the adjacent table were clearly listening to us argue, and I felt deeply embarrassed that we were having this discussion in public.
But Daniel didn't seem to care about the scene we were causing. He kept pushing his point about the importance of his friends' opinions to him and how he needed them to feel comfortable with our relationship. He said that if I genuinely loved him, I would make an effort to forge relationships with the people who mattered to him, even if it made me uncomfortable. I was scheduled to meet with my mother this weekend to finalize details for the bridal celebration, but now I didn't even know what to tell her. How do you explain that your fiancé's friends think he should dump you and that he's not entirely disagreeing with them? How do you admit that your fiancé has been discussing your private relationship details with his ex-girlfriend and asking his coworkers for advice on how to deal with your unreasonable behavior? The wedding was 4 weeks away,
and I felt like I didn't even know the man I was supposed to marry anymore. The man I fell in love with would never have allowed his friends to vote on our relationship or shared private details about our fights with his ex. But apparently, that man never existed. Or Daniel had transformed into someone completely unrecognizable. I kept swinging between feeling profound hurt and absolute fury. A part of me wanted to cancel the wedding just to see how his precious friends would react when their vote no longer held any significance. But the greater part of me was starting to wonder if perhaps they were right. Maybe Daniel and I weren't as compatible as I had believed. Second update. Well, events have dramatically intensified in ways I could never have foreseen. And I was honestly doubting everything about this man I thought I knew. First, thank you to everyone who advised me to stand firm. The comments about Daniel engaging in an emotional affair with Isabelle truly clarified the seriousness of the situation. And to the person who said his friends sounded like a toxic social club, they were absolutely correct. So on Sunday, I was supposed to meet my mother at a small coffee shop near her house to review the bridal celebration details. My mother had been so excited about this wedding and had been planning the party for months. She had a detailed list of activities and decorations and was expressing how proud she was that I had found such a wonderful man. I kept trying to focus on what my mother was saying about the food and the guest list, but all I could think about was Daniel telling Isabelle that I was demanding and his friends voting on whether he should dump me. Finally, my mother paused and asked what was wrong, because I was clearly not paying attention. I tried to dismiss it by saying I was just stressed about wedding planning, but my mother knew me too well. She kept pressing until I finally broke down and told her everything. The bachelor party vote, Daniel sharing our private matters with Isabelle, the messages I found, all of it. My mother was incandescently angry. I had never witnessed her this furious in my entire life. She started criticizing how Daniel had disrespected not just me, but our entire family by allowing his friends to discuss our relationship in that manner. She said that a man of integrity does not let his friends insult his fiancé, and he certainly does not run to his ex-girlfriend for counsel on relationship problems. Then my mother said something that profoundly impacted me. She asked if I had told my father about any of this. And when I said no, my mother said I needed to inform him immediately. She said my father would be absolutely heartbroken to know that Daniel had been allowing people to disrespect his daughter this way, and that he deserved to know what kind of man he was about to welcome into our family. The prospect of having to tell my father about this made me realize how truly humiliating this whole situation was. My parents had been so supportive of Daniel and so excited about the wedding. They had been boasting to their friends about their future son-in-law and commenting on how happy they were that I had found someone who treated me kindly. How was I supposed to tell them that he was actually allowing his friends to debate my worthiness?
My mother canceled the rest of our bridal celebration planning and said we needed to have a serious family discussion. She called my father and asked him to come meet us at the house because they needed to discuss something crucial. The entire drive over, I dreaded having to explain this mess to him. When we arrived at my parents' house, my father was waiting in the main room with a look of deep concern on his face. My mother sat down next to him and instructed me to explain everything from the beginning. So I had to recount the entire story again. The vote, the Isabelle messages, everything. My father became silent in that intimidating way he gets when he is genuinely angry. He didn't interrupt or ask questions. He just sat there, listening, with his jaw clenching tighter and tighter. When I finished speaking, he remained quiet for a considerable time before he finally spoke. He said that in 35 years of marriage, he has never once allowed his friends to criticize my mother, and he has never shared private details about their relationship with other women. He said that protecting your partner from disrespect is one of the most fundamental duties of being in a relationship, and that Daniel had failed at that in every conceivable way.
Then my father asked if Daniel had ever apologized for any of this, or if he planned to cease contact with Isabelle and establish clear boundaries with his friends. When I admitted that Daniel still thought I was overreacting and wanted me to meet with Isabelle to prove I wasn't controlling, my father looked absolutely enraged. My mother suggested that perhaps they should initiate a direct conversation with Daniel, but I instantly panicked. I could clearly imagine how horribly that meeting would unfold. Daniel would likely become highly defensive and portray me as being melodramatic, causing my parents to view him even less favorably. But my father asserted that if Daniel was going to be an established member of this family unit, he needed to fully comprehend that displaying disrespect toward me constituted disrespect toward all of them. Monday morning, I had to return to my office job and was, truthfully, appreciative of the distraction. My colleague, Patrice, a middle-aged woman with short, graying hair, noticed I seemed troubled and asked if everything was proceeding smoothly with the wedding planning. I didn't want to disclose the entire saga at work, but ended up sharing the summary of the bachelor party incident. Patrice was appalled and stated that her own husband's friends would never conceive of doing something like that. She remarked that in a committed partnership, one's fiancé should be defending them to his friends, not permitting a vote on whether they were worthy. But then Patrice mentioned a point that deeply resonated with me. She inquired if I had overlooked any other warning signs in my relationship with Daniel that I might have previously disregarded. Patrice suggested that when men allow their friends to disrespect their partners, it usually signals other underlying issues that have been minimized. I began to reflect on this and realized there had been numerous occasions when Daniel had prioritized the opinions of others over my feelings. For instance, when we were searching for a new flat, he repeatedly insisted on seeking input from Chris about the best district to choose, even though Chris resided in a different town entirely. Or when we were organizing our engagement celebration, Daniel constantly altered the plans based on his friends' suggestions, even after I had already made definitive choices. I had always simply viewed Daniel as someone who appreciated others' contributions, but now I wondered if he was actually someone who lacked confidence in his own judgment, or mine. Perhaps the Isabelle issue and the bachelor party vote were merely components of a wider pattern of him seeking external validation for our relationship status. That afternoon, I received a text message from Daniel asking if we could meet at the Central Gardens near our apartment to speak. He said he had been doing some deep self-reflection over the weekend and wanted to resolve our disagreement. I agreed, hoping he had finally acknowledged how completely unacceptable his behavior had been. When I arrived at the park, Daniel was seated on one of the wooden benches near a fountain, looking extremely solemn. He began by saying he had been soul-searching and that he understood why I was upset about the messages exchanged with Isabelle. He admitted he could see how it might appear inappropriate from my point of view. I thought we might finally be making progress, but then he stated that he still believed I was overreacting to the bachelor party incident. He insisted that his friends were just acting out of concern for him, and perhaps I should consider their perspective instead of automatically taking offense. He claimed that they weren't trying to be malicious, they were simply worried about our actual compatibility. I asked him directly if he thought his friends were correct about me being controlling and suspicious. He hesitated for an uncomfortably long time before finally saying that he thought there might be some truth to their concerns, but that he loved me anyway and wanted to find a way to work it through. Loves me anyway, as if my personality traits were defects he had to endure rather than qualities he genuinely appreciated about me, as if he were doing me a great favor by choosing to remain with me despite my supposed faults. I told him that if he genuinely believed I was controlling and suspicious, then perhaps we shouldn't be getting married. A marriage should be based on mutual affection and respect, not involving one partner who believed the other had fundamental personality issues that required correction. Daniel immediately retracted his statement, but then he started suggesting we should work on our communication and perhaps attend couples therapy to address some of these issues. He made it sound like seeking therapy was a requirement for me to demonstrate my willingness to modify my controlling behavior.
I pointed out that the actual problem wasn't my personality. It was the fact that he discussed our private life with his ex-girlfriend and permitted his friends to vote on our relationship. Daniel became visibly frustrated and claimed I was missing the key point, that the issue was how other people perceived our relationship dynamic, not just our internal view of it. He kept insisting that an external perspective was extremely valuable and that perhaps we were both too immersed in the situation to see it clearly. But I pointed out that his friends and Isabelle were not impartial observers. They had their own biases and motives that weren't necessarily in our best interest. Then Daniel said something that truly infuriated me. He suggested that perhaps the reason I didn't want external input was because deep down, I knew some of their criticisms were valid and was afraid of having to confront my own behavior. I couldn't believe he was attempting to reverse the focus onto me and make it seem like as though I was the one with the problem. I told him that I wasn't afraid of criticism. I was angry that my fiancé thought it was appropriate to allow other people to determine my worthiness instead of making that decision himself. Daniel claimed that he had made that decision. He proposed to me. But that didn't mean we shouldn't heed feedback from people who cared about us.
He asserted that successful marriages thrive when both partners are open to personal growth and change, based on input from their wider community. But I pointed out that his community seemed to consist mainly of individuals who saw me as the problem, not people who were genuinely invested in helping our relationship thrive. His friends voted that he should leave me, and his ex-girlfriend thought I was demanding. That wasn't a supportive community. That was a group of individuals who did not want us to be together. Finally, I asked him directly what he wanted from me. Did he want me to apologize to Isabelle? Did he want me to invite Isabelle to the wedding? Did he want me to sit down with his friends and let them explain why I wasn't good enough for him? Daniel said that he wanted me to make a sincere effort to build relationships with the people who were important to him, even if it was personally difficult. He said that if I truly loved him, I should be willing to prove to his friends that their concerns were unfounded, instead of simply being offended that they had concerns at all. I told him that I was not going to audition for his friends' approval, and that the fact that he thought I should was a far greater warning sign than anything I had supposedly done wrong. A partner who loves and respects you doesn't require you to prove your worth to other people. Wednesday evening, I was at the local market picking up items for dinner when I ran into Doris, Daniel's mother. We had always gotten along reasonably well, and Doris seemed pleased to see me. She started discussing how much she was anticipating the wedding and asked about the final details. But then she mentioned that Daniel had told her we were experiencing some pre-wedding nerves and that she hoped we were working through it properly. I tried to keep my response vague, simply stating that wedding planning could be stressful, but Doris kept pressing for more information. Finally, Doris said that Daniel had mentioned I was having some reservations about his female friendships, and she wanted me to know that she believed it was crucial for married couples to maintain their separate individual friendships. She shared that when she and Daniel's father got married, she had to learn to be comfortable with his female friends, and that it actually strengthened their marriage. I realized that Daniel had been discussing our relationship problems with his mother too, and likely framing it as me being jealous of his female friendships rather than him having inappropriate conversations with his ex. Doris clearly knew nothing about the Isabelle messages or the bachelor party vote. She only knew that I was uneasy about Daniel's female acquaintances. Doris continued by saying that she hoped I would give Isabelle a fair chance because she was such a sweet girl and had been part of their social circle for so long. She claimed that Isabelle had always been very respectful of Daniel's relationships and that she didn't believe I had anything to worry about. I wanted to tell her about the text messages and how Isabelle had been encouraging Daniel to view me as demanding, but I didn't want to get into a shouting match with my future mother-in-law in the middle of the grocery store. Instead, I just said that I appreciated her advice and that Daniel and I were working on our communication. But the entire interaction made me realize that Daniel had been discussing our relationship problems with everyone in his life, his friends, his coworkers, his ex-girlfriend, and now his mother. And in every single instance, he was presenting himself as the rational partner who was attempting to manage his difficult fiancé. When I got home and told Daniel about running into his mother, he said it was normal to discuss relationship issues with family. But I pointed out that there was a difference between asking for advice and consistently complaining about your partner to everyone who would listen. Daniel insisted that he wasn't complaining about me, he was attempting to gain perspective on how to handle a difficult situation. But I asked him why he never discussed these concerns directly with me, instead of talking about them with everyone else first. Why did Isabelle get to hear about our issues before I did? Why did his friends get to vote on our relationship before we even had a conversation about our concerns? Thursday morning, I was scheduled to have a final fitting for my wedding dress, but I called and canceled. I honestly couldn't imagine walking down the aisle to marry someone who believed his friends' opinions were more important than mine. The whole situation felt unreal, as though I were planning a wedding for a relationship that didn't truly exist. I kept thinking about what my father had said about protecting your partner from disrespect. Daniel hadn't just failed to protect me from disrespect, he had actively participated in it. He had encouraged his friends to criticize me. He had given his ex-girlfriend ammunition to judge our relationship, and he had made me sound like a problem that needed to be resolved, rather than a person to be loved. The wedding was 4 weeks away, and I still didn't know what I was going to do. My sister Zoe kept texting me asking for an update, and I knew Zoe would tell me to leave him if she received the full details. My parents were waiting to hear whether I wanted them to have that conversation with Daniel. And Daniel was acting as if everything was fine, and we were just experiencing normal pre-wedding anxiety. This was precisely why I knew he had no idea what was coming. I had been doing some serious thinking of my own and realized that if Daniel wanted external perspective on our relationship so badly, perhaps it was time he received some perspective he wasn't expecting. The question was whether I had the nerve to actually proceed with my plan, because once I did this, there was no turning back, and Daniel was going to realize that he severely underestimated the woman he had been calling controlling and suspicious. Stay tuned, because the next update was going to be monumental. Last update. All right, everyone, this was it, the moment everyone had been waiting for. Daniel thought he could permit his friends to vote on my worthiness and share our private life with his ex. Well, he was about to discover exactly what kind of woman he had been labeling as controlling and suspicious. First, I wanted to thank everyone who advised me to stand firm and not allow this man to disrespect me. The comment about giving Daniel the same energy he had been giving me truly stuck with me. But what transpired next was something I could never have foreseen. Wednesday afternoon, my sister Zoe was driving back from her optometrist appointment when she decided to stop by that small retail center near downtown to pick up some items from the main store. She was walking through the parking area when she noticed Daniel's car parked outside the florist shop. Zoe initially thought perhaps he was finally buying me flowers to apologize for all the recent conflicts, so she decided to wait and see if he wanted company or needed assistance selecting something.
She parked a few spaces away and was about to get out when Daniel emerged from the florist shop carrying a massive bouquet of deep red roses. Zoe was momentarily pleased, thinking he was making a significant gesture to repair things between us. But then, instead of getting into his car and driving toward our apartment, Daniel drove in the exact opposite direction. Zoe became curious and decided to follow him because something about the situation felt off. Why would he purchase flowers for me and then drive away from our home? She maintained a discreet distance behind him as he drove for about 15 minutes across town to Oakwood Park, which was a large area with walking paths and an old carnival section. That's when she saw her. Isabelle was waiting on a bench near the decorative archway, wearing a light summer dress and posing as if for a romantic film. Daniel walked up to her with those roses, my roses, and presented them to Isabelle as if they were meeting for a date. Zoe said she was completely stunned by what she was witnessing. Daniel was supposed to be my fiancé, dealing with engagement stress, and here he was giving romantic flowers to his ex-girlfriend in a public park as if they were teenagers meeting secretly. But it quickly got much worse. Isabelle jumped up and threw her arms around Daniel when she saw the flowers, and they embraced for a duration far exceeding a normal friend's hug. Then they sat down on the bench together, and Daniel had his arm around her shoulders while Isabelle leaned into him, looking at the roses and inhaling their scent. Zoe said they looked like a couple who had been together for years, not like a man who was scheduled to marry someone else in 3 weeks. Isabelle rested her head on Daniel's shoulder, and they were talking very intimately, with Daniel gently stroking her hair and Isabelle touching his chest. At one point, Isabelle looked up at Daniel with a dreamy expression and said something that made him laugh, and he leaned down to gently kiss her forehead. Then she turned toward him further, and they were face to face, just gazing into each other's eyes like a scene straight out of a romance novel. My sister was recording all of this on her phone. She captured clear video footage of Daniel giving Isabelle the roses, them sitting closely, all cuddled up, him stroking her hair, the forehead kiss, all of it. The video distinctly showed Daniel being affectionate and romantic with his ex-girlfriend while he was engaged to me. Zoe said she remained there for nearly an hour, watching them behave like a couple. They eventually stood up and walked around the park holding hands, rode the carousel together laughing and acting playful, and then returned to their bench to sit close together once more. When Zoe finally drove home, she was shaking with intense fury. She called me immediately and told me everything. I honestly didn't believe her at first. I thought perhaps Zoe was mistaken about the details, or that there was some innocent, rational explanation. But then Zoe showed me the video, and I completely lost control. There was my fiancé, the man who had been calling me suspicious and controlling for not wanting his ex at our wedding, literally having what appeared to be a romantic date with that same ex-girlfriend, buying her flowers, cuddling with her, acting as if they were in a relationship. All those months of Daniel telling me that Isabelle was just a friend, that I was being paranoid about their connection, that I needed to trust him and stop being so insecure. Meanwhile, he was meeting up with Isabelle in secret and treating her like his girlfriend. I was so angry I could barely think straight. So I resolved to proceed with my original plan for the family meeting, but now armed with irrefutable evidence. Friday evening, I texted Daniel and told him I wanted to have that serious discussion about our future with some of the important people in our lives present for support and perspective. I suggested we meet at the local town hall near our apartment, since it had available meeting rooms for public use. Daniel was actually pleased about this, because he thought I was finally agreeing to his foolish idea about involving his friends to mediate the situation. He asked if I should invite Chris and a couple of the other guys, and I said, of course, the more perspectives, the better. He was so proud of himself for finally getting me to see reason, but Daniel had no idea what was actually about to happen. I arrived at the town hall early and set up in one of the larger conference rooms. Daniel showed up with Chris and 2 other men from his bachelor party group, looking completely confident, as if they were about to stage some kind of intervention where they would instruct me on why I needed to modify my behavior. But then my backup arrived. My parents walked in, followed by Zoe, and then my uncle, Uncle Frank. Daniel's face completely lost color when he realized this was not going to be the conversation he had been anticipating. I started the meeting by thanking everyone for coming to discuss my and Daniel's relationship. I said that since Daniel valued outside opinions so much and believed it was important for other people to weigh in on our compatibility, I thought we should gather some different viewpoints. Then I asked Daniel to explain to my family what had occurred at his bachelor party.
I wanted him to tell my parents about how his friends took a vote on whether he should leave me because I wouldn't invite his ex-girlfriend to our wedding. Daniel started stuttering and attempting to minimize the incident, but Chris actually defended it and said that they were just being honest about their concerns because they cared deeply about Daniel's happiness. That's when my mother opened her folder and began reading excerpts from the text messages between Daniel and Isabelle. When I had first discovered those messages on Daniel's phone, I had taken photographs of everything so I would have proof. I had shared all the screenshots with my family so they would know exactly what we were dealing with. My mother read the parts where Isabelle called me demanding and where Daniel complained about our private relationship details. And that's when Daniel completely lost control. He leapt up from his chair and started yelling that I had violated his privacy and going through his phone was psychotic behavior. He was screaming about how I was trying to manipulate everyone by taking his messages out of context and deliberately making him look bad. But then Daniel said something that utterly horrified me. He looked directly at my parents and started falsely claiming that the reason I was so suspicious about Isabelle was because I had been cheating on him. He said I was projecting my own guilt onto him, and that's why I was so paranoid about his friendships. Daniel continued, getting louder and more desperate.
Daniel escalated the situation by falsely claiming to my family that I had been cheating on him for months, being secretive with my phone and working late, and that the entire Isabelle situation was a diversion from my own infidelity. Chris immediately supported this lie, and the other men nodded along, falsely claiming they'd noticed changes in my behavior and seen me being flirtatious. My sister, Zoe, erupted in fury, screaming at Daniel for being a pathetic liar, and my father stood up, voice trembling, giving Daniel 30 seconds to retract his words. Daniel refused, continuing to insist I was a manipulative liar trying to turn everyone against him. The chaos intensified with the arrival of Doris, Daniel's mother, who had been texted by Daniel. She immediately started yelling at my family, claiming I was unstable for invading Daniel's privacy and orchestrating the confrontation. My mother countered by yelling that her son was a cheat and a liar who was having an affair with his ex-girlfriend. As both families shouted at each other, with Doris adamantly defending Daniel and Isabelle as just friends, Daniel became verbally aggressive, stating that his friends were right and that normal women don't go through their partner's phones. That's when I finally stood up, silenced the room, and played Zoe's video of Daniel giving Isabelle the roses at the park. Everyone watched him embrace Isabelle, sit with his arm around her, stroke her hair, and kiss her forehead, clearly behaving like a romantic couple. Daniel tried to snatch my phone, screaming that it wasn't what it looked like and that he was merely consoling Isabelle, but his mother's face was white with shock as she demanded to know why he bought flowers and was touching Isabelle like that if they were just friends. Daniel desperately doubled down on his lies, alternating between claiming the video was misleading and attempting to blame me for stalking him, but Uncle Frank pointed out that Daniel was caught red-handed. I then pulled off my engagement ring and threw it directly at Daniel, telling everyone had just watched him cheating on me while he called me paranoid for being suspicious. Doris began openly crying and apologizing to my parents, realizing Daniel had been lying. As my family left, Daniel was still screaming that I had set him up, but Zoe turned and delivered the final blow. If he didn't want to get caught cheating, perhaps he shouldn't cheat in public spaces. The immediate aftermath had been absolutely frantic. Daniel had been constantly contacting my phone, alternating between profuse apologies and claiming that his relationship with Isabelle wasn't what it appeared to be. He kept saying that if I would just let him explain, I would understand that they were just friends supporting each other through a difficult period. But here was the ironic twist. Isabelle had been posting photos of the roses Daniel gave her on social media. She was literally flaunting their relationship while Daniel was attempting to convince me it was an innocent meeting. I had dodged the biggest bullet of my life. A man who would cheat with his ex while planning their wedding, then invent accusations about me cheating when confronted, was not someone I could ever trust. Daniel thought he was clever, allowing his friends to vote on our relationship while secretly dating Isabelle on the side, but he had no idea that his deception would be exposed in such a spectacular way. I was single and had never felt more liberated.
And that's how I dodged the biggest bullet of my life. Daniel thought he could control the narrative, but in the end, the truth and my family won. I may have lost a fiancé and a wedding, but I gained my peace and my freedom. Let me know in the comments below, what was the biggest red flag I missed? Drop your thoughts and share this story with anyone who needs a reminder to never audition for a man's love. Hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss what I'm planning next. See you in the comments.